Hello, everyone. Tonight we are drifting into the ancient shallows off the coast of what is now Siberia, where something massive glides beneath the ice-cold waves, something that makes modern whales look like a rushed draft. You can't see it at first. You only notice the kelp flattening, parting unnaturally. Then the water dips, no splash, just wait, and your breath fogs as you realize you're not alone down here. You're sharing this murky realm with a creature heavier than your imagination and slower than your nightmares. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Also tell me your location and what time it is right now. I want to know who's lurking through the ages with me. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You shuffle along the shallow seafloor, your feet kicking up ancient sediment that hasn't been disturbed in 10,000 years until now. Above you, a mass stirs. You tilt your head up slowly, the way you might check if the ceiling is still there in a collapsing house. And it is there. It's always been there. The Steller sea cow. It glides like a zeppelin underwater. No flapping, no kicks, just drifting. Its skin is wrinkled slate gray thick, like tire rubber, and speckled with barnacles. When it passes, the water grows warmer for a moment, like the entire sea exhales through its flesh. You reach out without thinking, and your fingers don't even make it halfway before the pressure of the water between you and its flank pushes them back. It doesn't notice you. Or maybe it does and you're just not worth noticing. Historians still debate whether this enormous herbivore was truly solitary or traveled in loose, quiet herds, ghostly processions through the kelp fields. What you do know, this one is alone now, and it's not in a hurry. You follow. Because what else can you do? The sea cow drifts toward a cove lined with basalt ridges. The water here is clearer. Sunlight filters down in pale streaks, and for a moment it feels like time presses pause. The sea cow rises and you rise with it. It surfaces slowly like a dream surfacing in the first seconds of waking. A wet gasp, not a spout like a whale. Just a low exhale, as if air isn't so much needed as tolerated. Then it sinks again like it regrets the effort. There are no teeth. Just giant lips and muscular pads inside the mouth built to mash seagrass. You hear it chew and it sounds exactly like someone eating celery through a pillow. It doesn't rush, doesn't flinch. A small fish bumps its snout and bounces away like it just hit a dock pylon. You loop around to its side. That's when you see the true scale, 30 feet long, maybe more. But it's not the length, it's the mass. Up to 10 tons of living, floating slowness. Imagine a creature heavier than an orca with no need for speed, no built-in weapons, just volume. Here's your weird fact for the night. The Steller sea cow had no nails or claws, but it did have a thumb-shaped bone in its flippers, remnants of ancient land ancestors. It used them to nudge seagrass into its mouth with the clumsy patience of a giant that never had a reason to evolve faster. The shallows get colder and your breath fogs again as you rise for another look. A polar fox yips from the shoreline. It's June. The ice is pulling back reluctantly, and the sea cow takes advantage of it, grazing on kelp that's been freed from winter's grip. Back in the day, this coastline would have seen dozens, maybe hundreds of these creatures slowly mowing the underwater meadows. You're lucky if you're seeing one. The waves roll in without rhythm. The kind of waves that make you feel like you're floating in a heartbeat instead of a sea. The sea cow lumbers forward, oblivious like a boulder rolling downhill in a dream. It doesn't eat constantly, but when it does, it clears a path like an underwater lawnmower designed by a poet. The water turns cloudy behind it. You see small fish dart in to grab scraps from the churned earth. A tiny octopus sneaks a ride along its back. The sea cow does nothing. This apparently is just life now, serving as a platform, a continent, a planet unto itself. You float beneath it, and for a second it eclipses everything. The ancient Aleut word for this creature meant siren's mother, though no one's quite sure how that translation holds up. But it fits. The way it moves slow maternal ghost like it does feel like it birthed legends. You start to wonder how many things in history existed like this, silently, massively, without needing our acknowledgement. And how many disappeared before we ever deserved to know they were here. Suddenly, the sea cow turns. Not fast, just a slow correction, like a drifting balloon encountering a breeze. But it feels personal. You realize it's moving toward a deeper shelf. Your breath catches. You don't want to lose it, but you also can't keep following forever. As it glides toward shadow, you float there in the cold, watching the last hints of light ripple over its back. And you feel that same thing ancient mariners probably felt when they saw land disappear behind them, like you've just left something too big to explain. You float where the shelf drops off arms, drifting like kelp, and watch as the creature drifts further into darkness. The sea cow is not fast, never has been, but you are slower, frozen by the sheer ridiculousness of what you've just seen. It's not every day you come face to face with something that shouldn't exist. Not by modern standards, anyway. The current nudges you forward and you yield to it. Below you, the giant turns again. It hasn't gone far, just deeper. And now, from this new angle, you see it differently. The width of its body, the improbable dome of its back, and then most jarringly, its ribs. Not just visible under the skin, but practically carved into it. You drop lower for a better look, and when you reach its side, your eyes widen. The ribs are immense. They arc down like petrified tree trunks, each one thicker than your thigh. They don't move when it breathes. They don't need to. The entire skeleton is so dense that it feels less like a framework and more like a buried cathedral of bone. Historians still debate whether these sea cows developed such heavy bones solely for ballast, or if it was some evolutionary hiccup from an even older lineage, an aquatic miscalculation that somehow worked. Either way, the result is the same. This thing is denser than most land animals, and denser still than most submarines. You knock lightly on its flank with your knuckle. Nothing cruel, just a curious tap. The sound is like drumming on a waterlogged log, low, hollow, and full of history. It doesn't react. Of course it doesn't. At this size and pace, who has time for curiosity? It rolls lazily as it grazes, exposing more of that armored underbody. The texture changes there, still rough but speckled with long, pale scars. Not violent ones. No bites, just wear. Like the hide of a creature that spent its entire life brushing against rocks, scraping barnacles and letting the world rub itself against it without complaint. You pause to hover beside its flipper. It's stubby and powerful, not graceful. The kind of limb you'd expect to belong to a creature built for shoving itself across muddy seabeds or awkwardly redirecting its trajectory in thick waters. There's something almost mechanical about it, like the flipper was designed not for speed but for corrections. Tiny nudges in vast space, and then you see the motion again, a tiny twist of that heavy torso. The creature turns toward the kelp forest, moving with such syrupy grace that you wonder how long it actually takes to decide to change direction. 5 seconds. 10. A full minute. Thicker than bone, slower than thought. Here's your odd fact for this stretch of the journey. Despite its enormous size, the Steller's sea cow had no real defense mechanisms. No tusks, no teeth, not even an angry flipper slap. It survived through sheer indifference, moving too slow and too big for anything to care. Still, you notice something interesting now. A shark small by prehistoric standards lurks in the near distance. You squint through the murk, heart lifting just a little in instinctive alarm. But the sea cow doesn't flinch. It doesn't even adjust course. The shark keeps its distance, circling wide, more curious than hungry. And that's when it hits you. This sea cow isn't afraid because it doesn't need to be. It's not made for flight. It's made for enduring. When you weigh 10 tons and your bones are denser than granite, you don't swim, you resist sinking. You don't hide. You become background. You look down and see the faint furrows in the sand, dragging lines where it's fed before. The seafloor is a manuscript of slow movement. Whole months written in the language of grazed kelp and disturbed sediment. You're walking through history that never expected an audience. Above you it rises again, and this time you follow more quickly. You've started to sync with its rhythm, slow inhale, slower, drift, steady, chew. You start to think this might be the tempo of a different kind of life. One not worried about inboxes or notifications. One not optimized for anything. It surfaces with a sound that barely qualifies as sound. More like the sea sighing through a closed mouth. It breathes and you imagine its lungs huge, ancient balloons contracting under that rib cage. Some scientists estimate that it could hold its breath for 5 minutes, others say 10. Either way, it only needs to come up a few times an hour. Imagine that kind of existence. Hours spent beneath the surface eating, drifting, surviving. Surfacing only when necessary, like someone who only checks their email twice a day. Glorious. Then you notice the barnacles again. Not just scattered, organized, like city blocks. Whole colonies dotting its back, thriving in slow motion. One patch of its spine even hosts a few crabs. Actual crabs crawling like it's a rock, or a reef. You get the strangest feeling that this creature doesn't live in the ocean, it is the ocean to certain things. Historians believe that this mutualism, this unintentional cohabitation may have helped shape the ecosystems around them. Little creatures finding sanctuary on something too slow to shrug them off. You drift back down as it turns again, and suddenly your vision floods with kelp. A wall of swaying green stalks nearly 12 feet tall in places. The sea cow plunges in like it's walking into a buffet. You watch it open its massive mouth, which looks like a couch cushion being pulled apart, and drag a curtain of kelp into its jaws. It doesn't bite, it doesn't rip. It just pulls and mashes like a living food processor that's forgotten it has an off button. It keeps chewing and you keep floating. There's no drama, no action beat, just a creature that is and has been and maybe always will be in some quiet corner of the world's memory. You're starting to feel the tempo now. It's like learning to waltz in zero gravity, slow, deliberate, and just a bit surreal. The sea cow does not accelerate. It does not pause. It simply transitions from one moment to the next with the grace of a landslide. And you follow, because whatever this dance is, you've been drafted into it. It glides toward the outer edge of the kelp forest. Here, the currents are stronger. The water smells different too, brinier. Charged like the sky underwater is about to crack open. You lift your face just above the surface and blink. The clouds are gathering. Thunder mumbles in the distance. Somewhere, a low-pressure system is tightening its grip. That's when the sea cow starts to eat faster. Not urgently, not frantically, but differently. The bites are bigger, the chewing less leisurely. It begins sweeping the kelp into its mouth with broad arcs of its lips, clearing wide swaths like it knows it's on a schedule now. This isn't just grazing anymore. It's tanking up. Biologists believe the Steller's sea cow could sense barometric shifts, possibly through pressure receptors in its bones or airways. When a storm was coming, it gorged, fast. Because storms meant waves, and waves meant rough feeding conditions. You try to match its speed, but it's an odd thing to be outpaced by something so slow. It's not that it's moving faster, it's just more committed. Every motion has purpose now, like a sleepy giant waking up just long enough to shovel dinner into its mouth before crawling back into dreams. Historians still debate whether this behavior was instinct or learned. Some say the sea cow was too primitive to know anything. Others argue that size and simplicity don't mean stupidity. And from where you're floating watching this creature accelerate its feast under a dimming sky, you're voting on Team Instinct plus Memory. You float beside its face just long enough to watch a tangle of kelp disappear into its rubbery maw. There's no chewing sound this time, just a rhythmic slurp, slurp, as it vacuums the greens with near-mechanical rhythm. Bubbles rise around its jaw. A fish darts past its eye and is ignored completely. You wonder how it handles the storms. With no speed, no shelter, no claws to cling to anything, does it just ride them out? Turns out, yes. That's exactly what it does. It sinks deeper, lowers its body against the seafloor, and lets the ocean beat itself into exhaustion above it. You remember that bit of trivia, now its bones weren't just heavy. They were insanely heavy, some of the densest of any marine mammal. It's like the creature was built to be a biological paperweight, keeping itself from getting tossed around when the sea gets mean. You start to feel the shift yourself. The current pulls harder now, not just nudging, but tugging. The surface darkens above. A drop of rain hits your face, then a second, then many, each like a tiny slap reminding you that you are not from here. Not built for this. But the sea cow. It's in its element. It finishes its latest mouthful and begins descending again. Not fast, just steady. Like someone turning off the lights in a room and walking away without bothering to check if you're following. You do. And down there in the dusk green murk, it settles on a flat bed of seagrass. Not eating now, just sitting, as if to say, let the storm pass. You hover a few feet above it, watching, listening. There's not much to hear, just your own heartbeat and the distant thump of thunder now echoing through the water like an old drum. The sea cow exhales, a long, almost theatrical sigh, then stillness. Here's your odd off-topic fact: during early Russian expeditions, sailors believed the sea cow could predict weather better than any man on board. They watched how it moved when it fed, when it hid. One sailor even suggested tying a rope around one and following it like a living barometer. The sea cow outlived that sailor, barely. You sit on the edge of the storm's arrival, marveling at how something so immense could be so passive. And yet it works. There's wisdom in stillness. You look up. The sky has gone gray. The rain is falling in earnest now, peppering the surface into a pitted mirror. The waves don't reach this far down yet, but you know they will. The sea cow knows too. Still, it doesn't panic. It doesn't move. Instead, it closes its eyes. Historians might argue whether it's capable of true rest, but in this moment it looks asleep. And in the rhythm of the storm building overhead, you begin to feel it too. That calm. That stubborn refusal to be rushed. Minutes pass, maybe more. You start to think this might be your favorite version of the end of the world, watching a 10-ton sea cow nap through a thunderstorm. Then, from the edge of your vision, something moves. Another shape, smaller, faster. A shadow flicks past another sea cow, no, a seal. It glides by, curious. Sniffs the air, dips under, then zips away unimpressed. You guess there's not much social interaction between lightning bolts and puddles either. You look back down. Your companion is still there, still breathing, still surviving, and you realize this is how it made it. For thousands of years. No teeth, no chase, just knowing when to eat, when to rest, and when to wait for the sky to calm down. You wake up. Or maybe you were never asleep, hovering in the glassy stillness after the storm. The ocean above is calmer now, smoothed over like a freshly ironed sheet. Light trickles down in hesitant shafts, and the kelp sways again, no longer in chaos, but in rhythm, as if the whole sea is relieved. The sea cow begins to move. It doesn't stretch or groan or check the weather app. It just lifts off the seafloor with a single undramatic flex of its flippers, sending up a puff of sand like a soft yawn, and then floats forward back into the forest. You follow. Always behind now, like a remora with social anxiety. And here in the aftermath, you really see it, the empire beneath the surface. Not the creature, though it remains your Leviathan tour guide, but what it eats. The seagrass. Miles and miles of it. You'd thought kelp was impressive. This is different. This is agriculture that nobody farms. Fields of long green blades, stretched to the edge of vision, swaying like they're listening to music you'll never hear. You pass coral outcrops thick with sediment and rocks colonized by urchins and sea cucumbers. Everything has the color palette of a foggy dream. Greens, grays, silvers, soft browns. And the sea cow is hungry again. It lowers its enormous face, and begins to tear into the seagrass less gently now, as if the storm whet its appetite. You float above and watch as it hoovers up patches of meadow in a slow arc. This is not random feeding. This is strategy, a looping pattern that conserves energy and maximizes mouthfuls. Historians still debate whether Steller's sea cows had migration routes, but based on the wear marks in ancient seagrass beds found on old oceanic maps, many believe they returned seasonally to certain patches like cows, rotating pastures but with less moo and more mass. And here's your authoritative fact: this seagrass is not just food. It's oxygen. It's erosion control. It's the sea's quiet infrastructure. These meadows absorb carbon like nobody's business and once spanned thousands of square kilometers across the North Pacific Shelf. Which makes you realize this sea cow isn't just living in an ecosystem, it is one. Grazing helps stimulate growth. Its waste fertilizes the ground. Its sheer weight presses nutrients into the seabed. Everything it does, every massive, unhurried movement makes the ocean healthier. Here's your weird tidbit. Seagrass is one of the few plants that can pollinate underwater using tiny balls of mucus. Yep, sticky little pollen rafts. Not romantic, but very efficient, kind of like the sea cow itself. You notice its lips are lined with stiff, bristle-like whiskers. They move independently, almost like fingers grasping strands of grass, tugging them in. It doesn't cut or tear so much as unpick the sea's embroidery one thread at a time. You float lower, closer to its face, and for a moment you catch its eye. It blinks once slowly. Not fear, not recognition, just existence. You know those moments when you lock eyes with a zoo animal and you both understand the glass between you? This feels like that, except the glass is made of millions of years and a shared indifference. It doesn't know you're from the future. It just knows you're not kelp. Suddenly it startles, not a flinch, just a pause. You turn. A second sea cow drifts into view. Smaller, younger, maybe a calf, or maybe a mate. Scientists are still arguing about whether these creatures paired off or just tolerated proximity. Either way, this one's clearly welcome. The two sea cows align, brushing flanks gently. No drama, no greeting call. Just a slow reconnection, like two clouds meeting again after a rainstorm. They graze together now in silent choreography, a kind of ancient pas de deux, only with more algae. You begin to feel like the third wheel in a very slow-moving relationship. And maybe you are. Because when you look down, you realize the meadow stretches even farther than you thought. And these two are just part of a pattern. You see another shape in the distance, then another, a whole line of shadows gliding between the seagrass rows like soft submarines. A herd. A real one. You almost want to laugh. After all this time assuming they were solitary giants here, they are grazing like manatees at a buffet. It feels oddly wholesome, almost unfairly peaceful. You try to count them. 571 glides out of view before you can be sure. Their backs are mossy. Some have little white starfish clinging to them. They barely ripple the water. If you blinked, you'd miss them completely. They don't need conversation. They don't need hierarchy. There's no leader. Just shared momentum and shared hunger. You wonder what it must be like to live that way. No arguments, no declarations, just agreement through direction. You watch them graze and remember reading that sailors once called these meadows the sea's pasture lands. And suddenly that phrase feels holy. The sea cows drift onward. And you, like some tired pilgrim, drift after them, willing to believe that if you just float long enough, you'll understand something vital about slowness, about stillness, about not needing to prove yourself through noise. The wind above dies completely. Even the waves seem to hush now. The only sound is the steady, steady crunch of prehistoric mouths reaping an empire that was never yours to rule. You're drifting in their slipstream now, an uninvited guest in a quiet procession of giants. The sea cows move in a slow crescent side by side, but never colliding like ancient ships in a ritual parade. No one's documented except you. Your body floats slack and you can't tell if it's from awe or just the realization that nothing you do matters to them. They exist at a scale of patience that humans never evolved. Then it happens. A ripple. Small at first, just a shiver in the water to your left. You tilt your head. Shark! Not massive. At least not by Cretaceous standards, but sleek, dark, and curious. It slinks closer, keeping parallel with the rearmost sea cow. You hold your breath not because you're scared for it, but because you're startled to realize it doesn't care. The sea cow doesn't twitch, doesn't glance. It just continues grazing, chewing a wad of kelp like a bored god. Historians still debate whether the Steller's sea cow truly had no natural predators. Some accounts claim that large sharks, orcas, or even prehistoric bears might have attempted a kill if the opportunity arose. Others suggest the sheer mass speed or lack thereof and sheer blubber content made them more of a chore than a meal. Imagine trying to attack a refrigerator full of mashed potatoes that's actively ignoring you. And yet, you can't help but feel nervous. The shark glides closer, inches from the sea cow's flank now. It gives a tiny test nudge with its snout, then darts off unimpressed. A moment later, it's gone, fading into deeper waters like a whisper you weren't meant to hear. The sea cow keeps chewing. You exhale. It's not predator-proof, not really, but something about it just deters confrontation. You suppose being this enormous and this unconcerned is its own kind of armor. Here's your odd fact: the blubber layer of the Steller sea cow could be up to 4 inches thick. That's thicker than a yoga mat, thicker than most bulletproof vests, and way more useful in the Bering Sea. Sailors used to say its fat was so dense that bullets couldn't penetrate it, though. To be fair, that was probably less science and more dramatic sailor regret. You trail the herd as they graze, spiraling through a wide arc. You notice how they avoid certain patches overgrazed perhaps, or littered with shell debris. They're not random feeders. There's a logic to it, a choreography you weren't taught. They do not rush. They do not fight. They do not compete. They simply are. But that doesn't mean they're invincible. You remember a story, one of the few with actual teeth. A tale passed down through coastal tribes of a time when sea cows were found beached not by accident, but because storms pushed them inland. Sometimes the tide receded too fast. Sometimes they misjudged depth. Sometimes being too big to fear anything meant being too big to fix a mistake. And here comes the human part. You drift back to the largest sea cow, the same one you met in the beginning. It's now dead center in the herd, flanked by younger ones. Maybe it's offspring. Maybe just freeloaders. Either way, it moves with quiet authority, not because it commands them, but because it's never had to prove anything. You drop low, hovering near its belly. That's when you see them jagged scars. Deep, long, healed over, but unmistakably from something once sharp, spear-like. Not a shark, not a bite. A man. Historians still debate whether early Aleut and Russian hunters even believed it was a living thing at first. From a distance, it looked like a rock, a floating island. Many didn't realize it was alive until it moved, which was rarely and never fast. Once they figured out what it was, the word spread like wildfire on salt air. A creature with meat that wouldn't rot fast, that couldn't run, that didn't fight. If you had a spear and enough patience, you had food for a village. You stare at the scar again, a story frozen in flesh. The sea cow glides forward, unaware or uncaring. Here's your authoritative fact. In 1741, when naturalist Georg Wilhelm Steller first described the sea cow, it was already rare. By 1768, just 27 years later, it was extinct. Not from disease, not from climate change, from spears, axes, and hunger. You drift upward, weightless, and stare down at the herd from above. They look like whales from this angle, rounded backs rising like rolling hills, but quieter, less theatrical. No spouts, no breaches, just breathing and chewing and drifting and surviving. You find yourself wishing for a predator, something to make them feel dangerous, something to justify the end, but there was none. Just people with too many mouths and too little time. The sea cows turn again slow as continents shifting, and you're hit with a strange ache. They weren't hunted because they were monsters. They were hunted because they weren't. No tricks, no speed, no violence. Just abundance and trust and an unfortunate lack of urgency. They didn't go extinct because they lost a fight. They went extinct because they didn't even know one had started. You reach out one last time, fingers extended toward the nearest flank. It glides past, leaving you with nothing but water and weight. The water is clearer now, as if the ocean itself has settled from its own storm. The herd of sea cows moves on deeper into the shallows. Yes, deeper into the shallows. You roll that contradiction around in your brain for a moment before you realize that's exactly what they do. They don't seek the open ocean. They stay here, where the waves break softer and the seagrass grows in braids across the sea floor. You lag behind a moment, then drift closer to the largest one. Something about its back looks different. You hover above, and then you see it life. Not just barnacles or sea lice, which you've come to expect by now. No, this is something grander. A tiny crab scuttles sideways across a thick green mat of algae that has fully colonized the creature's spine. There are limpets here, feather worms. You even spot what looks like a juvenile sea star curled into one of the skin folds like it's napping. This isn't just a sea cow, it's a reef, an ecosystem moving at 1 knot per hour. You circle around its dorsal ridge, taking it in. The mass of its body is so still, so reliable that entire microhabitats have set up shop. There are even snails creeping slowly along its hide, grazing the algae that grows from its scars and crevices. One of the sea cows, smaller and more active, bumps into it lazily and sends a spray of fish darting from their mossy hideout. It's like watching a walking tree get nudged by a deer. Historians still debate whether these living ecosystems played a role in the sea cow's behavior. Some think the weight of all this life might have slowed them even more. Others wonder if it gave them camouflage, turning their backs into mimic sea floors. Maybe both, maybe neither. This is the curse of studying the extinct. You get one fossil and a million theories. Here's your authoritative fact. Steller himself wrote that their backs were often so crusted over with moss and animals that one could mistake them for submerged rocks. When the crew of the St. Peter first saw one, they didn't think it was a creature at all. Just a mossy boulder drifting unnaturally against the current. Imagine how unbothered you have to be to host crabs on your back and still keep chewing. You get closer and really take in the skin texture, wrinkled like elephant hide but darker, tougher. And the smell, oddly clean. Not fishy. Briny, yes. Earthy. Like the underside of a wet stone left in the sun too long. The algae waves, slightly pulled by the motion of water stirred up by the sea cow's flipper as it does a lazy half-roll to access another patch of seagrass. Then something delightful. A small octopus unfurls from a hollow above its tail and swims off in a blur of rust red. You blink, then smile. There's a whole neighborhood here. You realize what this is: not just an animal but a community on the move. No declarations, no ceremony, just survival through stillness. We're conditioned to admire predators, the fast, the toothy, the dramatic. But here floats a gentle giant whose strength lies in its stability. It supports more life by existing than most creatures do by fighting for dominance. You remember reading that sailors once nicknamed them sea wagons because of how squat and unthreatening they appeared from a distance. It was meant as an insult, probably. But here you think it sounds more like reverence. Who wouldn't want to be the thing others rely on? Here's your odd fact in a few 18th century journals. There are references to seagulls perching on sea cows to rest mid-flight. One sailor even claimed he saw a puffin nesting on a particularly mossy individual. No one can verify that, but no one can quite disprove it either. The sea cow shifts again, this time descending slightly. The motion disturbs a cloud of silt. Tiny creatures scatter. A few crustaceans cling tighter. The kelp shivers. It's not a dramatic moment. It's not even a statement. Just gravity and mass and another day of being everyone's favorite island. The smaller sea cow from earlier floats in, bumps its side gently against the matriarch's flank, then peels away again. What? Was it a nudge of affection? A test you don't know? It's like watching two glaciers communicate with brief touches of snow. You drift above again and look down at the totality of this creature. Its size, its role, its burden. You start to wonder. Did it know it was carrying life? Did it notice the extra weight? Did it feel the fish dart through its scars or the algae itch as it spread? Probably not. But that doesn't mean it didn't matter. In a world obsessed with domination, this creature chose to endure. It grew life instead of taking it. It hosted life instead of hoarding space. You feel a weird pang in your chest, a mix of envy and sadness. Because there's something comforting about a being so unshakable that entire communities just grow around it. It's like watching a time-lost ark drift through the end of the world, too calm to sink. And now you're part of that too. Drifting just a few feet above its back, listening to the muted sounds of water, your heartbeat syncing with its lazy pulse. You swear you can feel it now. Not the thrum of nerves or blood, but of weight, of responsibility, of being slow enough for the world to catch up and rest for a while. The sun angles through the water above, throwing golden patterns across its back. The algae shimmer, slightly catching light in soft pulses. A few fish return. One of the crabs resumes its patrol. The reef has returned to motion, just not the kind we usually celebrate. The ocean is a whisper again, and you're floating beside a creature that sounds like it's breathing through a wet leather bag. It surfaces. Slowly. You follow, watching the dome of its back break the water like a rising moon. And then, from that barnacle-cloaked mouth, it exhales. The sound is how to describe it. Imagine a bellows full of molasses giving one last puff in the middle of a foggy cathedral. Wet, slow, almost apologetic. No drama, no spout, just the heavy breath of something that has survived storms and spears and still can't be bothered to gasp. This is the sea cow's breath. It rises only once every several minutes. Some estimates say 5, some say 10. Historians still debate whether it was dependent on environment or individual age. But one thing is certain: it didn't breathe because it wanted to. It breathed because it had to. You hover nearby, keeping your own breaths quiet out of some strange respect. Watching the movement of its ribs, you try to imagine the size of its lungs, each probably the volume of a compact car inflating and deflating beneath all that blubber and bone. The sea cow doesn't break the surface much, just its nostrils and a little patch of forehead. It's like it wants to stay forgotten, and then it sinks again. No splash, no urgency, just that quiet, dragging weight. You drift down after it, already anticipating the rhythm. It's not just breathing, it's ritual. Here's your odd fact of the section. The Steller's sea cow didn't have a diaphragm. That means it relied on the muscles between its ribs to move air. In other words, it had to flex its entire chest wall just to breathe. Every breath was a full-body event, like doing a slow crunch to inhale. So when you see it breathe, you're not just watching respiration. You're watching effort. Every exhale costs something. You descend with it again back into the green quiet. Bubbles trail from its nostrils, strung out behind it like beads on a necklace. It settles on the seafloor and resumes its slow feast as if nothing had happened. As if breathing isn't a break, it's an interruption. You hover there for a long time. 1 breath, 2. You start to count. Not just time, but moments. How long between bites? How many stalks of seagrass it eats in one mouthful? How many minutes pass between breaths? It feels like you're tuning into the heartbeat of the earth, slowed down to prehistoric tempo. Then another rises. Not a sea cow, you. You break the surface just enough to take a breath, and in doing so, you realize something: the sea cow does this better than you. You gasp, refill, feel the urgency in your lungs. It never gasps. It waits. It waits until it's absolutely necessary, and even then, it barely acknowledges the surface. You wonder what it would feel like to live that way. Not just in the sea, but in your own skin. Never in a rush, never gasping for anything. Letting time pass, like kelp swaying against your side. Back below, the creature shifts again. One eye turns towards you. It doesn't blink. You think it might be acknowledging you, or maybe it's just checking whether you're edible. Spoiler, you're not. Here's your authoritative fact. The sea cow's eyes were small, pea-sized compared to its massive body. Located just above the corners of its mouth, they gave it a strange, downcast gaze. It probably didn't see very well. Some scientists argue it relied more on touch and vibration than vision. So maybe it's not looking at you, maybe it's feeling you. You float closer, very close now, just above its back. You can feel the warmth radiating from its body, yes, even underwater. That much mass creates its own little envelope of heat like a mobile fireplace with algae growing on top. The sea cow begins to stir again. You feel it before you see it. Just a twitch, a roll, a shift of weight like a mattress being slowly turned over. Then it rises. Higher this time. For a moment, it almost seems like it's going to break the surface again, but no, it glides just beneath the top layer of water. And then yes, there it is. Another breath. It's quieter this time. You almost miss it. A sigh lost in the hum of the ocean. And suddenly you feel a strange wave of affection. Not just for the creature, but for the act of breathing itself. It's not something we think about until it's taken from us. But this sea cow, every breath is a kind of prayer. Every exhale a surrender. It doesn't fight for air. It receives it. You realize you've been holding your breath again. Let it go. You release the air from your lungs and drift a little higher. The sea cow has turned slightly, revealing the full curve of its side. Another younger one floats nearby, copying its rhythm with adorable inaccuracy. You can see the calf's flanks trembling slightly as it struggles to match pace. The breath holding, the sinking, the feeding, the surfacing, it's all still new. But the mother doesn't rush it, just continues her pattern. You wonder if they teach each other. If breath is learned, not instinctual. And that sends your brain spiraling. How much of this ancient world was learned and lost? What rhythms of survival have we forgotten just because they weren't fast enough to impress us? The pair rises again. A double exhale now. Wet, soft, warm against your face. You close your eyes and imagine what it would be like to fall asleep to this sound if, every night. That steady, leathery whoosh, that ocean bellows sigh, better than any ASMR track. You open your eyes just in time to see them descending again. Mother and calf. Heavy, patient, full of air they'll only use when it matters. The ocean folds over them, and you, still floating, finally let your body relax. The sea has gone quiet again, as if the storm, the breath of the procession, it was all just a strange lullaby you dreamt through. But something's different now. The temperature shifts, the salt tastes sharper, the sun lowers behind the clouds, and the water dims with a deeper kind of tension. You're not alone. Far ahead on the gray line, where water meets the sky, you see something bobbing. At first, it's vague, a silhouette, but then it becomes many silhouettes. Small boats, primitive, silent, drifting slowly toward the cove where the sea cows graze in peace. And now you're seeing it not from the sea cow's side, but from the shore, from behind the eyes of the first hunters, Aleut men. Sea-hardened, quiet as the sky in a storm's aftermath. They paddle narrow skin boats called bidarkas, made from driftwood frames stretched with sea lion hide. The paddles barely disturb the surface. They know this water like you know the walk from your bed to the fridge at 2 a.m. They're not here by accident. For days they've watched, waited, whispered. Because out here in the wind-lashed Aleutians, nothing comes easy. And a creature that doesn't flee, that's a gift. Or a trap, or both. Historians still debate whether the first Aleuts believed the sea cow was a spirit or just a massive, meaty stroke of luck. Oral traditions hint that early encounters were met with awe, not reverence, but disbelief. One elder reportedly described it as the island that breathes. Others thought it was a whale that had forgotten how to dive. But hunger is a clarifying force. The men in the boats don't speak. They glide forward, crouched low, harpoons ready. No bronze, no steel, just bone and driftwood sharp enough to be persuasive. You're floating nearby now, invisible in your second-person dream space, watching the scene unfold. The largest sea cow rises, takes a slow breath oblivious, and sinks again, leaving a ripple behind. One of the hunters squints. There, movement. The boats fan out. Here's your odd fact of the night. The Aleuts were so skilled in open sea navigation that Russian explorers later copied their kayak designs. They could hunt sea otters, seals, even orcas with enough coordination. But this was something different. The sea cow didn't fight back, and that made the kill feel wrong. They draw closer. From your place in the water, you see the sea cows grazing just like before. Same rhythm, same breath. But now the stillness feels tragic, like a lull before something ancient breaks. The first harpoon strikes. There is no scream, just a thud. The weapon disappears into a slab of blubber and the creature flinches. Not fast, not violently, just confused, like it's been tapped on the shoulder in the middle of a long nap. The calf beside it whips around, bumping its mother's side. The herd slows. One young adult drifts off, not in fear but uncertainty. There's no instinct for this. They've never known harm. The harpoon rope goes taut. The boat rocks. The men pull slowly, carefully, like trying to land a massive sentient sponge. Another harpoon lands. This time, the sea cow jerks. The sound it makes is low, not a cry, more like a groan rolling up from inside a mountain. One of the hunters looks away. The others keep pulling. From your perspective, it's like watching someone try to reel in a slow-moving hill. And here's your authoritative fact: Georg Wilhelm Steller, the German naturalist aboard the Russian ship St. Peter, wrote in 1741 that it took hours to kill a single sea cow. Not because they fought, but because they wouldn't leave. When wounded, they didn't run. They stayed with each other. Sometimes the others would try to keep the dying one afloat. You see that now. The calf swims beneath its injured mother, nudging her belly, lifting her up. Another sea cow joins, flanking her other side. Their movements are clumsy, gentle, hopeless. The men on the boats keep pulling. They don't cheer, they don't gloat, just tighten the ropes. Their stomachs are empty, their villages are cold, and this creature will feed them for days. Still, it's not a hunt, it's a subtraction. And you, floating in the memory, feel it. One of the sea cows surfaces again. The sound it makes is heavier than breath, more like a release. The hunters freeze. One mutters something under his breath. It's not a word you understand, but the tone is clear. They're not proud, just hungry. Another harpoon. The sea cow goes limp in the water. It hasn't died yet, but it has stopped resisting, because that's not what it was built for. The boats move in. Ropes are passed. Blades are readied. The water turns cloudy. You look away. You return to the others, the ones still alive. They haven't scattered. They hover nearby, circling slowly. They don't know what's happening, or maybe they do and simply lack the instinct to flee. Because no one ever taught them that humans don't graze. They harvest. The calf stays by its mother even after the final breath. The hunters can't reach it, don't want to. One raises a hand to shoo it away. Me, it doesn't go. You watch this scene freeze like an old painting that everyone keeps misreading. To some, it's triumph. To others, tragedy. To the sea cows, just another ripple in the water. You drift in the wake of wooden boats, blood-spotted and dragging meat, heavy enough to sink a lesser vessel. The water is darker now, not just from clouds, but from history itself. You feel it like a cold front rolling in. This is the part of the story where the ending starts. The sea cow herd is scattered, not panicked. That's the haunting part. There's no bolting, no frantic churn of the sea. They just spread, like shadows at dusk, slowly, aimlessly. The calf from before lingers, circling the spot where the mother was taken. It surfaces, breathes, sinks, loops around again, like it forgot what comes next. You follow it. Your presence means nothing. You're the ghost here, and the calf doesn't know it's been orphaned in the middle of a story it can't understand. Historians still debate whether sea cows formed long-term bonds or if we're anthropomorphizing. But Steller himself noted that when one sea cow was killed, others would hover near the body even after hours passed. Once they even tried to lift a dead companion toward the surface, not to save it, just to keep it close. You watch as the calf brushes along another adult, perhaps its aunt or just another giant with no answers. There's no urgency, no direction, only proximity. Grief without language. The surviving sea cows begin drifting out of the cove, not in a line, not together, just away. Away from the boats, from the kill site, from whatever gut-deep tremor has been triggered in their world. You hang back and float in the void they leave behind. Here's your odd fact: despite their size and diet, sea cows made almost no sound. No songs like whales, no barks like seals, just the occasional snort or sigh. A creature that existed in near silence for millennia, now erased with noise. The hunters row back toward shore. The meat will last weeks. The fat will burn in lamps. The hide might become part of a kayak. Nothing is wasted except perhaps the future. You picture the scene from above, the sea cows moving outward in soft spirals, the boats retreating in a grim line, and the empty gap in the water where one once floated like an island. The ecosystem holds its breath. And then something shocking. One of the sea cows moves fast. Not fast, not dolphin fast, but faster than anything else you've seen so far. It kicks its tail, angles its body, and bolts toward deeper water. Not far, not gracefully, but with intent. You follow. Why this one? Why now? You're not sure. Maybe it's the youngest adult. Maybe it simply has the least to lose. Or maybe it understands on a level beyond language that proximity is no longer safe. It disappears into thicker kelp. You chase the fading bulk of its back through the waving curtains of green. The stalks snap in its wake, releasing bubbles and tiny sea fleas, and then it stops. Not out of exhaustion, but purpose. It's found a clearing, an underwater hollow where the seagrass is shorter, the rocks more exposed. It begins feeding. Carefully, quietly, alone. You settle beside it, breathing slowly now. The water tastes more metallic here. Maybe iron from disturbed stone. Maybe just sorrow. Either way, the sea cow chews methodically, trying to return to a rhythm that no longer fits. You think about what is left behind. The herd, the calf, the rest of the coast still crawling with boats. Here's your authoritative fact once discovered. The sea cow's fate unraveled quickly. Russian expeditions, fur traders, starving crews all heard of the slow, fatty giants in the shallows. Within 27 years of their formal discovery, every last one was gone. Not endangered, not protected, just gone. Too big to chase, too slow to escape. You watch the lone sea cow surface, take its heavy breath and sink again, and you start to realize something uncomfortable: extinction doesn't always roar. Sometimes it shuffles into the kelp alone and chews in silence while the world forgets how to wait. Your limbs feel heavy now. The water around you seems thicker. The light above is weaker. Even the fish seem quieter, like they're observing a moment of silence that has stretched across centuries. You drift close enough to touch it again. You don't, but you could. The barnacles on its back are fewer now, maybe scraped off in the frantic movement, or maybe this one was too young to grow its own reef. The algae thins near the tail, revealing raw, wrinkled skin. You see scars, not from harpoons, just life. Scratches from coral, slaps from sea ice, maybe even the accidental bite of something ancient and curious. You realize this sea cow has lived a life you'll never understand, not full of drama or milestones, but of grazing and drifting and surviving. And now, it's the last shadow of a broken herd. You remember the calf again. Floating in confusion, still waiting for its mother to surface, still listening for a sound that will never come. You don't know how long the sea cow feeds in that clearing? Minutes, hours? A whole ghost day. Eventually it turns, just slightly. You think it might be leaving, but it doesn't. It sinks to the bottom and rests. And for the first time, it feels not like sleep, but waiting. You wake again to movement, barely perceptible, a shift in water, a rustle of kelp like breath against your neck. The herd has reassembled. Not the full swarm from earlier, not the peaceful arc you floated with before the harpoons. No, this is something else, smaller, tighter, like a whisper instead of a hymn. 5 sea cows. That's all that remain. They drift together now in uncanny silence, synchronized not by design, but by desperation. There is no leader, no follower, just shared movement like a flock of birds underwater with nowhere to land. You float above them and watch their slow procession, and for a moment you imagine a funeral. But this is no parade of grief. It's survival stripped of ceremony. You recognize the younger one from before, the calf still trailing near what must be a maternal figure, smaller now under the weight of memory. Every few minutes it nudges her side, not insistently, not playfully, just checking. Still here. Still here. Historians still debate whether these last gatherings were coordinated or coincidental. Some argue that the sea cows, like elephants or whales, may have returned to certain sites during times of loss, places where the kelp was familiar, where the tides were kind. Others say it was just the illusion of intention projected onto instinct. But what you're seeing now feels deliberate. The 5 form a broad oval. Grazing resumes, but it's slower, less rhythmic, as if hunger no longer guides them, only habit. And here's your authoritative fact. The final known sighting of a Steller sea cow came in 1768 on Bering Island. The last group was small, only a handful of individuals. Some were already wounded. Within months, they were all gone. No final battle, no single harpoon stroke, just the quiet attrition of presence. You float lower, watching them pass over the seafloor like ghosts, dragging history behind them. The water is darker now, kelp fronds sway like mourners. Even the fish keep their distance. Then something subtle shifts. The sea cows turn in unison, without sound, without signal. You feel it before you see it, a current shift. Barely a tug, but they respond. They begin to move faster. Not fast, never fast, but with direction now. Like a decision's been made. You follow. They drift toward a narrow passage between underwater ridges, a place where the seafloor slopes downward and the light fades fast. The water grows cooler, shadows stretch longer. You realize they're not just feeding anymore. They're leaving. This is the last journey, and you get to watch it. Here's your odd fact: the bones of Steller's sea cows are almost impossible to move once buried. Their sheer density, 3 to 4 times that of typical mammal bones, makes excavation a nightmare. In some places, entire skeletons have been left untouched because they simply can't be lifted without breaking. You think about that now as you trail the last herd. These aren't animals, they're monuments. Drifting statues made of flesh and memory. The passage grows tighter, the kelp thins, and then you're through. You enter an open stretch of seafloor, wide and bare, dotted with boulders and bleached shell debris. The sea cows fan out again as if marking new territory, but there's no joy in it, no curiosity, just motion. You notice something else: their bodies are leaner. You hadn't realized it before, but the grazing has changed. The kelp beds are sparser here. Maybe over-harvested, maybe abandoned too long. Their lips tug at the stalks with more effort. It's harder now. This is the end of the meadow. The calf breaks formation, briefly nudging a patch of sand. There's no seagrass there, just detritus. It sniffs, nudges again, then gives up. You hover above and start counting again. 1 breath, 2, 3, and then they pause. All 5 stop moving, in perfect, eerie stillness, like they've reached the limit of something distant, memory, hope. They hover there, 5 shadows etched into the sea. You realize this is not an escape. It's a final gesture. They've moved beyond the reach of the boats, beyond the sound of paddles, into a space untouched by knives or names. They're not surviving anymore. They're fading. You wonder what it must be like to be part of the last generation, to exist knowing that no others are coming, that your purpose, feeding, grazing, giving shelter, is ending not with fire or flood, but with a slow vanishing. There is no sound but the soft click of barnacles adjusting. No motion but the slow sway of massive tails. No drama. Just wait. You float between them now. They let you. Maybe because you're not loud. Or maybe because they already know you're a ghost too. The calf turns one last time, nudging its mother's side. Still here. Still here. And then the light shifts. Above you, clouds break for just a moment. A shaft of sun pierces the water and catches on their backs, illuminating algae and moss and old scars like gold leaf on stone. You feel it then. The shadow of a herd that once ruled the shallows. Not with teeth, not with fear, but with presence. And now that presence is pulling away. No drama, no violence, just one long, slow breath, and the beginning of silence. You sink slowly, now weightless but heavy in the chest, into the quiet where they've settled. The sea cows no longer drift like a herd. They've scattered again deliberately this time, as if even proximity now feels too hopeful. Each one rests in its own patch of seabed, separated by ridges, kelp, and silence. You hover above one, the largest, maybe the oldest. Its flank rises in steady rhythm. Inhales like low tide. Exhales like old wood shifting in its frame. You glide closer to its body, tracing the contour of its midsection, and that's when you see it again, the skeleton under the skin. The ribs, immense, pale, dense. They don't flex like most mammals. They hold. They brace. You reach out, not to touch us, just to see better, and realize the bones are closer to stone than bone. Weighty, wide-set, more architecture than anatomy. And here's your authoritative fact. The bones of the Steller's sea cow were so dense they functioned as natural ballast, preventing the animal from floating uncontrollably to the surface. It's a condition known as pachyosteosclerosis, thickened and hardened bones. Not a disease, just a weird evolutionary perk that turned their skeletons into anchors. That means every time they surfaced for breath, they had to work for it. All that lift just to break the surface for a moment of air, and then right back down. Like boulders learning how to swim. You circle the rib cage again and catch the curve of the spine, trailing all the way to the base of the tail. It moves ever so slightly, more like settling than swimming. The blubber, thick as upholstery, shifts around the frame like pudding over a skeleton. This creature didn't evolve for elegance. It evolved for endurance. You remember reading that their bones didn't float in water. Most animal skeletons do, even whales. But not sea cows. Their remains sink, always. Even in death, they're too grounded for escape. Here's your odd fact. In some modern dig sites, researchers have found that bones from different individuals are layered like driftwood skeleton atop skeleton. It's theorized that dead sea cows might have attracted others, maybe out of curiosity or some primitive grief. That means some of the last gatherings might have happened around the dead. You picture that now. Not horror, not mourning, just presence. You float lower just beside the creature's flank and study the way the skin folds over the ribs. Deep creases, like someone tried to fold the creature into a suitcase once and gave up halfway. A crab crawls from one fold to another, disinterested in your presence. And then you hear it, a distant sigh, not from this one. Another. Somewhere across the reef, a long, hollow exhale that bubbles up and vanishes. Not a cry, not a call, just breath again. You move toward it and find another smaller, perhaps half the size of the last. This one is feeding, but not enthusiastically. A mouthful of grass, a long pause, another mouthful, like someone chewing out of habit, not hunger. You drift above and look down at the curve of its back, not yet colonized by algae. It still looks new, not young but unfinished. Like it didn't get enough time to become the island it was supposed to be. And you think, what does a skeleton this heavy feel like to carry? You consider your own spine. your own bones. Hollow airy meant for motion. These bones were not, they were built to stay. They're not prison bars, they're anchors, which is maybe why this species lasted so long. The world changed around them, ice ages, floods, human arrivals, and they stayed. Because they didn't need to chase, didn't need to flee. Just graze, breathe, and endure. But what happens when staying isn't enough? You glance back at the larger one and notice it hasn't moved. At all. You drift closer. No rise, no breath, you wait. Count. 1 minute, 2, 3. Still, the crab on its side keeps crawling business as usual. A few fish dart beneath its flipper unbothered. But the creature itself, it's not resting. It's gone. No gasp, no death roll, just stillness. And the only proof is that it no longer rises. You back away slowly. The water doesn't react. The others still feeding, still drifting, still living like nothing has changed. Because what else can they do? You rise upward above the herd, if you can still call it that. From here, it looks like shadows spilled across the bottom of a bowl, each one separate, each one barely moving. And beneath them, wait, you understand now. Why their bones were so heavy. Why their bodies sank, not swam. Why they never ran. Because this species didn't survive by being fast or fierce. It survived by staying put. The skeleton beneath the skin wasn't a burden. It was a promise. I'll hold, even when the tide rises, even when the hunters come, even when no one's left to remember. I'll hold. The water is warmer here near the coast. Shallows roll with sunlight and kelp brushes your ankles like silk thread from the world's oldest loom. You're drifting beside a pair of sea cows. Yes, a pair. A rare sight now, and you know it. They're close side by side. One large, one smaller, not quite a calf, but not yet full grown. You think for a moment they might be family. Then the smaller one rolls, not away, underneath. Its snout nudges at the belly of the larger one, gently, repeatedly. The older sea cow shifts slightly and you see it an underside slick with folds, and there the mammary slits, discreet nestled in thick skin designed to protect and nourish. The younger one latches, and there in the hush of prehistoric shallows you watch the sea cow nurse her calf. It's not fast, it's not greedy, it's methodical. Like everything else they do, nursing is slow, deliberate paced to match the heartbeat of a creature that lives on delayed instincts. Historians still debate whether the sea cow raised calves the way whales or elephants do over years with deep familial bonds, or whether we're projecting our hopes onto bones. But here, right now, it feels real. The calf leans into its mother's bulk. She shifts slightly, tail sweeping sand, and sighs a deep exhale that rolls like a low tide across your shoulders. Here's your authoritative fact. Steller's sea cows produced milk richer than that of cows, seals, or even whales. So thick, it had the consistency of cream. It was said to be slightly sweet with a nutty kelp-like flavor, a delicacy to starving sailors. That richness wasn't indulgent, it was survival. In freezing waters, a calf needed fat fast. You watch as the calf suckles, eyes closed. Occasionally it pauses, nuzzles, then resumes. It's not just drinking, it's trusting. Trusting that the ocean will stay soft, the current gentle, the predators distant, and the mother there. Here's your odd fact. One Russian explorer noted that the calves would nurse even while the mother was being butchered. He wrote it down like a field note, but you could feel the weight of it now. Not horror, not even tragedy, just a moment too slow to understand that the world was changing. You watch the calf press close again. Its flippers curl slightly under its chest like a puppy's paws. Its eyes flicker open, then close. And its mother continues to drift unfazed, chewing gently between every long pause. Around them the water is still. Fish spiral near their tails. Tiny shrimp tuck themselves beneath the folds of skin, seeking shade and warmth. It's not a mother and child, it's a floating village. You hover above and watch as the mother lifts her head. For a second, just 1 second, you imagine she sees you. She doesn't. She breathes deeply and sinks a little lower. The calf follows, still latched, drifting downward like a shadow clinging to its source. They don't break rhythm, not once. They move into a patch of seagrass, the mother resuming her slow feast, while the calf bobs nearby, belly full milk, still clinging to its mouth in a pale froth you wouldn't notice unless you were close, too close. You keep your distance. It's a quiet intimacy, and you're just a witness. There's something holy about it. You think about how few mammals in the sea nurse their young. Whales, dolphins, seals. All fast, all vocal, but this is different. It's anchored. No leaps, no clicks, just closeness, and fat, and time. You glance toward the horizon and see the shadow of a boat far off. Too far to matter yet, but it reminds you. Time is running out, not for them, for this moment, this rhythm, this version of life that can only exist when slowness is allowed to thrive. The calf surfaces, breathes, returns. The mother continues to feed. And you begin to understand this is why extinction hurts. Not because of violence, but because it erases patterns like this, relationships that evolve before memory. Milk that fed creatures too large to fear, moments too small to write down. You drift beside the calf, now close enough to see its skin smoother than the adult's, less barnacled, still developing its mossy coat. You want to reach out and touch its flank just once, but you don't. You've seen enough now to know these creatures aren't here for your wonder. They were here before awe. And they'll vanish without your permission. The calf nudges again, this time under the mother's flipper. A sleepy push. A need for reassurance, maybe. Or just warmth. She responds by turning slightly, making room. No fanfare, no gesture, just enough. You look up again. The boat is closer. You hate how fast it moves. You look down. The milk drifts like a cloud in the water, fading, dispersing, feeding the sea. Everything the sea cow gives goes somewhere. Nothing is wasted. You back away slowly, watching the calf curl into its mother's side again. Still here, still here. There's no countdown, no drumbeat, no prophetic wind to mark it. Just a ripple in the water that doesn't come back. You're floating sane as ever, drifting in the stillness left behind after the calf's last feed. But now the mother is still, not the heavy resting kind of still, the other kind, the final kind. You float closer. Hesitate. Then closer again. No breath. You wait. Count. 1 minute. 2. 3. Still nothing. You hover beside her now, staring at the curve of her back, waiting for the flinch of flipper or the ripple of a slow, slow inhale. It doesn't come. The barnacles don't twitch. The moss doesn't stir. Her body, once so warm you could feel it through the water, is already cooling. And the calf, still nuzzling her side. You look away. Here's your authoritative fact: unlike whales or seals, sea cows didn't beach themselves when they died. They simply stopped floating. Their heavy bones, so good at keeping them low and grounded in life, pulled them straight down in death. No song, no spiral, just one long sink into the dark. You watch now as the body shifts almost imperceptibly and begins to tilt. Slowly it descends, heavier than breath, heavier than grief. The calf nudges once more, then follows her downward, confused. There's no panic. That's the part that breaks you. No cry, no chasing the body to the bottom. Just an uncomprehending delay. A calf without the vocabulary for death. You float beside it. You want to tell it what happened, as if words could cross species and centuries. But what could you say? She's gone. She never had a chance. Or maybe just, I'm sorry we found you. Here's your odd fact: when the last few sea cows were killed off, the sailors who did it reportedly showed no joy. They wrote in their logs about the last one, about how it did not flee and the meat was less fatty than expected. They knew. They knew it was over, and still they cut. You look down. The mother's body is almost out of sight now. A dim bulk pressed into the sand, the moss still clinging like a funeral coat. The calf surfaces, breathes. You want it to leave, swim away, find the others. But instead, it loops back around. Lower this time, searching again. The curve of its back trembles as it circles the space where she used to be. Historians still debate whether this is instinct or mourning. Is it looking for milk or memory? You don't know, and you're not sure it matters. The calf circles again, then again. The movement is slower now, almost aimless, and then finally it drifts. Not toward the herd, not toward the open sea. Just away. You let it go. You stay. There's something about this silence that feels deeper now, like the water is holding its breath, unsure how to respond. Even the fish keep their distance. A sea cucumber plodding across a rock pauses as if to mourn with you. You descend. The mother's body rests like a fallen monument. Barnacles still anchored. Moss still swaying. You reach out not to touch her, but to be near. It feels like the least you can do. Here's the truth. You weren't prepared for extinction. Doesn't come with fire. It doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself like a parade of mistakes. It arrives softly, one creature at a time, one missing breath, one calf circling a shadow. And then, nothing. You rise again. Above it all. Higher and higher until the seafloor blurs and the water grows light. There's no blood in the water, no body count, just one more ripple that doesn't come back. And you finally understand. This is what extinction sounds like. A mother that won't rise. A calf that doesn't understand why. And a witness, just one, floating in the silence. You don't remember swimming away. It's like the water carried you. One minute you were hovering above her, the next you're somewhere else, shallower, quieter, emptier. Your body moves, but your mind is still back there, circling slowly like the calf. There's no herd now, no pattern. Just scattered silhouettes and the awkward spacing of animals that no longer know how to be together. And then amid all this loss, you stumble onto bones. Real ones. You glide low over a rocky shelf, and there they are, ivory-colored, sun-bleached, partially buried in sediment. Ribs like collapsed tents. A jawbone wide enough to frame your whole body. The skeleton of a sea cow exposed by the current and time. At first, you assume it's ancient, but it isn't fossilized. These bones are recent by geological standards. Soft edges, flakes peeling at the joints, the kind of decay that says someone should have stopped this but didn't. Here's your authoritative fact: for years after their extinction, the remains of sea cows were still found on beaches across the Bering Islands. Their bones were too heavy to float far, so they often stayed near their feeding grounds. In the 1800s, scientists found entire rib cages still partially intact. Some were mistaken for whale bones until the measurements didn't match. You drift above the skeleton, mapping it with your eyes. You trace the length of the spine, count the ribs, and marvel again at how thick everything is. These aren't the bones of a swimmer. They're the architecture of a living island. And then, from the corner of your eye, you notice something strange. Footprints. Not animal tracks. Human ones. Faint but unmistakable. Sandals or soft boots pressed into the silt near the rib cage. You drift lower. There are more older ones partially filled in. Some fresh. Someone's been here. You're not the only one remembering. A team of scientists, maybe. Or a local expedition. Maybe even a lone historian squatting beside these bones, sketching the rib layout into a notebook with salt-stiff fingers and a whisper of regret. You picture them now crouched low, brushing algae off a vertebra with a toothbrush, murmuring facts like prayers. 10 meters long, pachyosteosclerotic. Extinct since 1768. You wonder what they felt. Sadness. Wonder guilt. Or maybe just a quiet, useless wish we should have waited. Here's your odd fact: in 2007, a nearly complete Steller's sea cow skeleton was rediscovered in a remote cave on Bering Island, hidden under layers of driftwood. The bones had been preserved by accident, protected by the very ecosystem the creature once helped shape. Like it was trying to leave behind a last draft. You think of that now as you float above this bleached monument. She didn't get a grave. She got remembered by accident. And now, generations later, you are here. with your useless, aching hindsight, watching bones that once carried thousands of pounds of moss and milk and memory sink deeper into the earth. You rise, drift toward the cove, and that's when you hear voices, modern ones. Above the waterline, a group stands along the rocky edge, parkas, clipboards. One of them points to the water. Another sets down a case aluminum scratched scientific. A drone lifts off, buzzing like a mechanical gull. You stay low, watch from the shadows. They're not here to hunt. They're here to understand. One lowers a sensor into the water. Another reads numbers on a screen. Their words are soft, half lost in the wind. Salinity's off. Could have been a nesting area. No, too shallow, maybe seasonal. You watch them work, moving gently among the ruins like respectful archaeologists at a burial site. No jokes, no arrogance, just reverence. Historians still debate whether modern science can redeem extinction. Is it enough to study what's gone? Can names and specimens replace what once grazed these waters with the weight of small planets? Probably not. But you feel a strange warmth now. Not hope exactly, but presence. These people didn't come here to forget. They came here to look directly at the gap and say, "This happened." You drift deeper away from the shore, leaving the scientists to their notes. Somewhere behind you, the drone zips once more, then lands with a quiet plastic cough. You think about that calf. Still out there maybe, or maybe not. You'll never know, but someone's asking the right questions now. And that's something. You reach the last bend in the reef and find another patch of seagrass. Untouched, bright green, curling softly in the current. You imagine them here grazing. A mother, a calf, a herd that didn't know how to run. You close your eyes, and for one impossible moment, you almost believe they're still here. You drift for what feels like hours. Or maybe it's just a few slow minutes stretched out by the silence. There's no more movement now. No herd, no calf, just the soundless sprawl of open water and memories woven into seagrass. The sun begins to slip below the horizon, and its fading light spills across the shallows in long golden lines. Everything starts to look older, like the ocean itself is remembering. And then you see it, just a shadow, far below. It doesn't move. At first, you think it's another skeleton. Just bones embedded in sediment, some forgotten fossil. But then the angle shifts and the light catches something unexpected texture. Moss, barnacles, not just bone. It's a sea cow, but it isn't alive. Not quite. It's not moving, not grazing, not breathing. Just there. Half preserved, half lost. A shape too heavy for memory to carry, too real for stories, too quiet for museums. You lower yourself beside it. Its skin is still visible in parts dark, worn, frayed by salt and time. The algae on its back has dried and curled like ancient script. Its flippers are curled beneath its side as though it fell asleep and forgot to wake. It's beautiful and terrifying, because this is what extinction actually looks like. Not dust, not ash, but form without function, presence without pulse. A body too stubborn to vanish completely. You circle once, twice, then stop. Here's your authoritative fact today: only a few full skeletons of the Steller sea cow remain. Most are incomplete, scattered across the collections of universities and maritime museums. But none can capture the weight of what it meant to be a sea cow. The sheer thickness of its reality. You think about that word extinct. It sounds so final, so clean. But down here you realize it's not a door slamming shut, it's a shadow that lingers. A bulk that refuses to be erased. A ghost that sinks instead of floats. Here's your odd fact in 2021. A proposal was floated, no pun intended, to de-extinct the Steller sea cow using DNA fragments and modern manatees. Scientists called it restorative cloning. Critics called it a vanity project. The debate still drifts through the academic deep like kelp with nowhere to root. You're not sure what to think. Maybe it's possible, maybe it isn't. But as you hover beside this final body, this monument to slowness, stillness, enoughness, you realize something important. Even if they could bring it back, we don't know how to make room for something that big and that unbothered anymore. Our seas are louder, faster, hotter, colder, hungrier. Would we make space for it this time? Would we wait for it to breathe? Would we let it drift and feed and sleep without wondering what we can get from it? You don't know. You just float there. And then you rise. Slowly, the sea cow falls away beneath you, fading into the dark like a planet with no orbit. The water grows clearer. The sky returns. The stars blink on, soft and patient. And you realize the story isn't about the sea cow anymore. It's about us. What we notice. What we forget. What we love too late. You break the surface one last time and breathe in. Not because you need to, but because you can. Let it settle now. Close your eyes. Breathe like they did, slow, full, deliberate. You've drifted through the story of a creature that moved too slowly for predators, too silently for myths, and too trustingly for us. The Steller's sea cow wasn't built for our world. It lived in rhythm with tides and seagrass, shaping its own ecosystem just by existing. It fed without rush, raised its young with rich milk and quiet persistence, and floated through centuries like a moving island. And when we found it, it didn't fight. It didn't flee. It just stayed. Too big to chase, too slow to escape. Extinction didn't crash into it. It brushed past gently in boats and footsteps and hunger. Even now, its story lingers not in living flesh, but in weight, in bones that sink, in milk no one can taste anymore. In silence. We tried to remember it with drawings, measurements, Latin names. But the truth is simpler. It was here. It was enough. And now it isn't. So breathe again. Not with panic. With presence. Carry its rhythm just a little longer into whatever world you walk back into. Maybe one where stillness has value. Maybe one where the last breath means something. Now drift. Let the shadow settle under your ribs like a slow tide. Let it be heavy and true. Let it stay.